Welcome back, 365 Sports. Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com. And, of course, now the new podcast with Baylor Plus with Colt Barber, also of Sic'Em365.com, that you can hear and watch every single day. Brought to you, of course, by Richard Carr, as all of our Baylor segments are. And, Grayson, practice continues. The offensive line remains the biggest question. And I know that some guys have been held out of practice and whatnot, but is that the thing that will continue to make you nervous until you see a couple games of production from them?
I think it has to be. I mean, anyone that watched Baylor football last year, I mean, that was the area where you just felt like every single game you're going to be at a disadvantage or trying to, climb uphill as you're just hoping that the offensive line was going to be able to protect Blake Shapen and Sora Robertson. So I think coming into this year, there's a lot of hope with all the new faces. They brought in a lot of guys. They attacked the transfer portal. The young guys got older. So you're just kind of hoping that, Mason Miller's able to figure this out and Jake Spavital's new scheme comes in and, maybe it all comes together. Like we've seen in the past. I mean, the 2020 offensive line for Baylor was terrible, and then Eric Mateos came in, and the 2021 offensive line was, arguably the best in school history. And so I don't know if we're going to see that drastic of a shift, but I do think you can get a lot better in 1 year. I'm expecting them to, but I will also say they got to start trending towards that, because I don't think so far this fall camp they've shown that they are that kind of offensive line. I think it's going to start this weekend with the scrimmage that they have coming up tomorrow. They need to find a way to put together a really good performance and give their offense a chance against Baylor's defense.
So the first game is 2 weeks from tomorrow, and we're going to get a starting quarterback announcement soon. It's going to be within the next 2 weeks, obviously, and probably within the next week. Do you think that there's enough that's occurred over the last few days that possibly that could be announced tomorrow when Dave Aranda meets with the media?
I think it definitely could be, and I feel like Dave Aranda has, sent out some just maybe alerts or just kind of he's mentioned it a few times that he would like to make a decision, and so it feels like they're kind of trending towards that. And it makes sense. They're going to have a simulated game week next week. And so it would kind of make sense that you would have your quarterback situation figured out going into that week. I'm curious how he goes about it. I would assume he's going to get asked about it tomorrow. So maybe he goes ahead and makes it official, or, maybe he just does it in-house. I guess that's possible as well. But I do feel like at the end of the day, the answer will be DeQuan Finn. I do think that he has really excelled so far this fall and really pushed himself into that starting quarterback role. I've felt this way since the spring, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent that he's doing a great job and really starting to, I think, maybe take that position over, even though Sora Robertson has obviously battled extremely well this offseason.
Grayson, do you think that if one thing happens to the other, we'll see a package for the other one? Or is this something that kind of have to, at least early in the season, write out who they pick?
It's interesting because the only package that I could see being utilized would be some sort of QB power with Sora Robertson. Outside of that, I don't know. I don't necessarily know why you would do it. I just think because if you watch DeQuan Finn play at Toledo, he can do designed runs, and he's going to do designed runs at Baylor, absolutely. But his best attribute is actually within pass plays when he's getting outside the pocket and then scrambling from there, as opposed to just a straight-up QB power or read option type thing. Again, he can do those, but his biggest skill set is on the outside and utilizing his speed, whereas Sora Robertson really gives you a physical presence in the run game. I mean, he's 220 pounds, so that could be something, but ultimately I do think if they pick the guy, it's going to be that guy's team. And if you do see anything, it'll be very minimal.
It seems like for as many questions as there are about the offensive line, there were, a large amount of questions about the defensive line heading into this offseason, and then they go and they hit the transfer portal pretty hard. And it sounds as though as we draw closer, while there still remains a lot of mystery around the O-line, I probably needed to tap the brakes a little bit and not get too excited, but it feels like there's a lot of positive momentum in terms of the way the D-line's being talked about and the impact that they're expecting from that group.
Right, and it's a really interesting. Last year, I mean, TJ Franklin might have had the best spring and fall practices of all time. I mean, the guy, I think everyone talked about, he had like 25 sacks between spring and fall camp. It was just historic, honestly, the way he was being talked about in the production he was putting on the field. And then obviously you show up to the games and you just kind of realize, well, the offensive line just wasn't good. And so you kind of had that issue where you were seeing that the defensive line was playing well, but it was really because the offensive line just wasn't very good. And then, of course, the defensive line ended up being pretty average last year. I think this year they've done a really nice job of addressing the needs that they had from last year, though. Bringing in a Linus Noel to shore up the nose tackle position, giving you not only a guy with a lot of size at 337 pounds, but also experience. I mean, he's an older guy, a redshirt senior. He's been around the block. He's ready to go. He's ready to work hard. He's ready to play in a Power 4 environment and for a Power 4 school. So I think he really fills that need. And then kind of expanding from that, you got Jackie Marshall returning to health. They really needed him last year. He, of course, got injured. Now you get him back, and he was supposed to be their best defensive lineman last year. And I think now this year he's really poised to, I think, be their best guy up front. And that's saying something because they got a lot of really intriguing pieces with Cooper Lands, who's now a year older, Trevin Maye, who really didn't have a great year last year, but is really, I think, turned it around. I think we're starting to hear good things about him, and he's really adapting well. I think he's going to be a big part of it. And then you got your wild card guys who really could take this defensive line from being good to, pretty good to being really, really good. And those are guys like Kyan Roberts-Day, Brendan Bett, and Trey Wilson. Those three guys I definitely have my eye on that could raise the ceiling of this group even more.
Grayson, what's new on the recruiting front?
Right. So recruiting-wise, I mean, things have kind of slowed down a little bit. Jaden Sanders, the Kilgore four-star cornerback, chose Michigan last week. So he's out of the equation for now. Baylor's still in on Oaks Christian tight end Stevie Amar. He's getting closer and closer to a decision. Baylor's been recruiting him for a while. It felt like if Baylor was going to land him that it was going to be, a long time ago. Seems like he's wanted to take his time with his recruitment a little bit. So I'm actually not exactly sure which way that one is going to go. I know Baylor felt like they were in a really good position for a while, but Cal and BYU and Boston College have done a nice job recruiting him. So that'll be an interesting one. Of course, he was the tight end for Nate Bennett, who is currently a Baylor quarterback as well from the 2024 class. So those are pretty much the biggest storylines. The 2026 class is kind of starting to come together a little bit with Quinn Murphy, Davis Penn, Rylan Morris. They're still looking at, many, many guys there. So it's still a long way to go. But I think during the season, as you get game invites, you'll start to see even more who the priorities are in the 2026 class.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com. Grayson, for those who have not seen it yet, where can they find the new podcast with you and Colt?
Right. It's on Baylor Athletics YouTube. It's also on Inside Baylor Sports on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. So definitely be sure to check that out. Colt and I have been having some fun with it. It hasn't really changed anything about, our daily content on the premium side, but it's definitely been a nice outlet to just kind of talk about Baylor sports in general for about 30 minutes every weekday. And as we move forward, we'll obviously be talking a lot of football and basketball, but hoping to also talk about the other sports as well and be able to kind of dive deep in that regard too.
Thanks, Grayson. We will talk to you again next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com with us here. And Craig, the offensive line is going to give people agita until it doesn't.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've been talking about it for freaking 8 months now. And, going on O-line, just improvement in general, it's been a couple of years. So until we see it, there's going to be valid concern and questions about what to expect and what we're going to see. And so, that's one of those places as well where that's an anchor. And if you have a running quarterback, that's all fine and dandy, but it's sure as hell better to have some design runs and things like that to allow him to maximize what he can do, have a run game to play off of to allow him to do the things that he can do. But if there's no run game and there's no threat of a run game and you can't hold up blocks, well, then all the athleticism in the world is going to be great for evading sacks, but not so much in turning it into probably a lot of wins. And so, I think that's clearly the key. Even if you don't follow Baylor or follow it closely, if you've just like prepared yourself for the Big 12, you probably walked away from any synopsis or recap you've seen or read and said, well, O-line is clearly their biggest issue. And if you don't know, that clearly is. Everything else seems like it's pretty okay to good to maybe even great in some cases. But that O-line, you just don't know until they're out there and they're doing their thing. And I don't know even if against Tarleton State if we'll know for sure, but we damn sure will know by week 2. And by the end of non-conference, we'll have a full picture of what to expect for better or worse. But if they can just be average, then I think this team's bowl capable. But if they can't be, then I think that's really going to be in doubt unless Dave Aranda taking over the defense just has such an effect that it's, not taking them from being below average to average, but taking them to being like even above average and being good enough to create situations where you don't have to rely as heavily on your offense. So all these questions we'll find out in a couple weeks, and I can't wait. But, it's been a long road and a lot of questions about that O-line.